and I'm remembering to start recording. But you know, what's good is I don't have to introduce anyone. It's just me. You're stuck with me today. But bear in mind, since I don't, I'll try to answer questions as I see them come through, but just put them in the chat box and we'll try to go through them towards the end if I miss any. But for those of you who have gotten to know me, you know that I'm not a big fan of the common stuff. And that's what this talk is about. Everyone's got endless summer hydrangeas. It was an all right plant with a fantastic marketing program behind it. But it's really not that special a plant. It's just amazing what you can do when you throw a few $1 million of marketing behind a plant. And that's something that we kind of see these days of sometimes the marketing is way better than the plant. So what my goal is today is to show you a number of different hydrangeas that are out there, because that's what I love having people say is I didn't realize there were so many. And I've been lucky through my travels, both here and touring Japan, seeing how much really is out there. So what we'll do is we'll start in with the general, Mophead hydrangeas. So most of you years ago, this is what everyone grew, Nico Blue. This is an old standard it's a fine performer in the garden. It's what everyone expected out of a hydrangea, that wonderful sky blue that made you think of Cape Cod and Nantucket. Fantastic plant in the garden. But we always got worried because when you get those freezes, you lose your flowers for the year. So up on the stage comes Endless Summer. And what's significant about this plant is it blooms on new wood. And most of your hydrangea macrophylla, they would flower on old wood. So, if you got a hard freeze, you lost your flowers. Or if you had an inexperienced landscaper who prunes your hydrangeas, he or she is basically imposing a freeze, an artificial freeze on your hydrangeas by cutting all your blooms off. But with Endless Summer, since this bloomed on new wood, the thing was, even if it had a hard freeze, you'd get blooms that season. Now, one of the big tricks is you also have to make sure it's got plenty of fertilizer. Hydrangeas can tend to be a bit hungry. So that's the trick to getting new flowers. But the thing is this trait of reflowering or getting a flower set, even when the first ones have been frozen, it's not unique. It turns out there are a lot of old varieties kicking around that have this trait. And of course, when Endless Summer came out, everyone's racing to find what other ones are out there. And they did, some DNA testing. They found out, which ones had this remonted gene. This is one that was named for Coach Dooley down in Georgia. He was actually, despite him being the football coach, he loved plants, and he actually took Dr. Durr's classes. And when he couldn't make a class because they had a football game, he would actually send his secretary to Dr. Durr's class to take notes. So Dr. Durr kind of responded and named this hydrangea after him. It's another one that, it doesn't come in a pretty blue pot, but it'll do exactly what Endless Summer does. And it'll rebloom or give you bloom if we've had a freeze. Another one called Penny Mac. This was named after Penny McHenry, who was one of the founders really of the American Hydrangea Society. This is another rebloomer. Then they bred with this one and got a more compact one called Mini Penny. Another good reblooming hydrangea. There's several others out there. Oak Hill is another one. But this one actually comes from right in our county. This one is from a gardener in Kernersville, Wyatt Lefevre, a phenomenal gardener, and a very humble gardener. But he had this hydrangea that always reflowered, and he didn't know exactly where it came from, but it ended up getting a name of, the cultivar name is Wyatt Lefevre, and he named it Dear Dolores after his unfortunately recently departed wife. Adrian and I actually have consider the Lefebvre's great friends, and it's a fantastic hydrangea. And just like any others, it depends on what soil you've got as to whether you're going to have blue or pink soils. But this is another one that gets sold. I think it's even in the Southern Living collection, but a good reblooming hydrangea with local roots. Then there's other ones out there of the Mopheads. This is Nantucket Blue, which obviously doesn't read the label because if you put it in less acidic soils, you're going to get a Nantucket pink. Not the, sometimes you'll see this spotting show up on hydrangeas. It doesn't necessarily impact the health of the hydrangea. It just looks untidy. And of course, one of the ways to not have this is make sure your hydrangea is happy. Make sure it's got plenty of, not in too much sun. It's got plenty of water and adequate fertilizer. But this is one that really, sometimes you got to look at beyond the flowers. And this one has fantastic foliage. It's glossy. It almost looks like it's been waxed, but it's called Big Daddy. And it's aptly named because those flowers can get, I've seen them probably up to 10 to 12 inches across. They're huge. This came from a colleague down in Georgia, Ozzie Johnson. This came, I think it was a seedling in his garden, but it's really, one of the things that plague hydrangeas are powdery mildew. But one of the things when you see a hydrangea with this really nice glossy leaf, they tend to be very resistant to powdery mildew. So Big Daddy's a fantastic hydrangea. Then there's been, it never ceases to amaze me that when a plant group gets hot, everyone starts breeding with it. So we've been inundated with so many different hydrangeas. It's almost overload of you can't keep them straight. So there's all these, this Double Delight series that came out, which has, not just the individual florets, but there's florets within the florets. It's a really unique looking flower. It's a great performer. Then you get some of these new ones that had a little bit of a different color to them. This is a fun one that it grew on me. It was a little bit of a different color called pistachio that had this green in the florets. It's definitely unique. I don't think you do a huge landscape with this, but this is more for, the plant collectors wanting something a little different in their garden. But moving on beyond Mopheads, what a Mophead is basically, it's all sterile florets. What a lace cap is the actual fertile florets or the fertile flowers on the plant. And then they'll be surrounded by a few sterile florets. And this is one, when I was at High Point University, I had the ability to constantly keep adding new things. And hydrangeas was something that I really was gunning for, to have a pretty big collection. And this is one that seemed to do, better than most. It was called Lanarth White. Even though it's not a big mophead, it was just stunning and it flowered forever. It seemed to be in flower pretty much the entire summer. I don't know if it just kept sending up new flowers, but it was a reliable performer in the garden. And what's nice is you can actually call hydrangeas pollinator plants, because when you've got these fertile flowers, the pollinators just go after them. And so, that can attract plenty of pollinators into your garden, so you can get that added benefit aside from just the aesthetics of the hydrangea. But Lanarth White is a really good one to have in the garden. Like I said, all these new ones that were coming in, then you started getting these different florets where there's multiple petals. This is another one in that Double Delight series, Stargazer. It really drove me crazy when I do labels, because they keep, they have the cultivar name, which is Compito, and then the trademark name, which was Double Delights was the series, then Stargazer. And it's kind of like I had to start getting bigger and bigger labels, because trying to fit these things on a label is quite a chore. Another one that came out was, I think this might have been a Proven Winner or a Spring Meadow one, was Let's Dance. That was another series, Starlight. This one did really good in the garden. We had this in a hillside garden that we did when I was at High Point. You know, real nice light blue. Those, even the fertile flowers had a bluish cast to them. Performed very well. This one would switch colors a little bit in the depending on the pH of the soil. But this is one that hands down, it's an old variety. We Americanized it by giving it the name Fuji Waterfall, but the true cultivar name is Fuji no Taki. This plant, like I said, it's got that really glossy green foliage, so it's resistant to powdery mildew or any of the foliar diseases that tend to hit hydrangeas. But the flowers just, it's kind of like they keep building upon themselves. You get these wonderful double florets, but it just keeps coming and coming and coming. So like an individual flower just keeps putting wave after wave of florets. And what's nice is this one will actually reflower later in the season. So this is one that I don't understand why it's so hard to find. You know, when you can find one, buy one. We've got some, and I don't know if I'll sell it yet until I can get enough critical mass to be able to know that I've got plenty of stock to offer it. But it's a fantastic hydrangea to have in the garden. That's Fuji Waterfall. But look at that. I mean, it's a work of art in itself. Of you when you start diving down all these little petals that are on the blooms. There's another one. Adrian and I picked this one up in California called Shooting Star. Again, that's the Americanized name. Sumida no Hanabi is the true cultivar name. This one you can kind of find online. We carried this back from California in a duffel bag, and I think it got pretty beat up, and I think it succumbed. Unfortunately, I think it was too young when it went out for the winter. But this one has these just, you know, almost looks like reminiscent of a firework, where these florets, the sterile florets, are just hanging out, you know, way beyond where the fertile flowers are, and they've got this wonderful blue cast to them. It's just a really cool looking flower. Something definitely that, you know, you're not going to stumble upon in a Lowe's or a Home Depot. Moving out of the hydrangea macrophyllus, or the big leaf hydrangeas, hydrangea paniculata, or some people call them PG hydrangeas, which, you know, is hydrangea paniculata grandiflora, which is an old variety. So they just, you know, shorten it to a PG hydrangea. These are the ones that, you know, they vary. I built a fairly decent collection of these. And what was interesting was having a lot of different cultivars allowed me to see that the bloom times varied. And this one, Daruma, which came over from Japan a number of years ago, was always the first one in flower. Now, it didn't have the huge, you know, flowers that like our next one, Limelight, would have. But this was one that the pollinators would always go after. So if you're looking to have a long season of bloom in your garden, this would be a great one to incorporate to kind of get this whole season started with the paniculatas. But then Limelight came out, and this was a proven winners, Spring Meadow one, and it hands down, it was a game changer. This just kept flowering no matter how much you cut off of it. It kept flowering the whole season long. It's great for cut flowers. It's great for dried stems. The only drawback I'd say to Limelight is the fact that it's a big growing plant. It will get, you know, I've seen them, I think some of the ones at High Point were pushing 10 feet tall, almost 12 feet tall. And so they get hacked back. So that's the only concern I'd have for that in most gardens is whether or not you have the space to put it. But what was great was, you know, you had Limelight, which is visible right here. And then further down, this is one that came from the same breeder called Little Lime. And it's about half the size of Limelight. Still the same blooming qualities of, you know, constantly blooming all summer long, great cut flower, but about half the size. So whereas you know you can look at Limelight pushing 8 to 10, maybe 12 feet in height. Little Lime, you can look at it more like about 5 feet in height. and about the same spread. But so that this is a little better for, you know, a smaller garden, unless you want to just dedicate, you know, a giant portion of your garden to one thing. That's not how I roll on the garden though. But, you know, great performer, another great plant, just a little bit smaller in stature. This was just a shot when we were up at Cornell visiting their gardens. They have a fantastic display of all the different paniculata grandifloras, but just the way that they have changed from, you know, the original PG hydrangeas, of all these ones they've been selecting for how the blooms age, where you start getting these wonderful pink tones or these bicolor tones. So it's not just the initial white flush, which is pretty much the standard for how when they first leaf, you know, come into flower, they're white. But then some will age more and stay in the white. Some will go to a light pink. And then some will even push into what I'd say is some reddish tones. But it's just been amazing to watch the diversity and how the breeding has changed these. Now looking at some of, you know, what we consider a native hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia, or our oak leaf hydrangeas. And these are just fantastic in the gardens. This is one of the original ones that, you know, really kicked it off, Snow Queen. I want to say this came out of, it's one of the mail orders, and it's escaping me right now. But this will get, you know, you're talking a 10-foot tall by 10-foot wide plant. So this is again one that, you know, if you've got a smaller size garden, you might want to stay away from this one. But then the National Arboretum came up with almost like the Wizard of Oz series. So they had Munchkin. This is a nice little dwarf oak leaf hydrangea, better for the smaller garden, probably pushing about 3 foot by 3 foot in size. And then they had another one that they bred, it's a little bit out of focus, but called Ruby Slippers, that will, you know, much like the paniculatas, the blooms will actually get this nice kind of pinkish tone to them. So they've been looking at that for a breeding goal of how the blooms age. Along with, you know, these, there's a couple really cool, what I would say double flowered ones. So this one called Snowflake. At the Ralston Arboretum, they've got a fantastic planting right at the front gate of these. And it's great when you look at them, of just like some of those double flowered big leaf hydrangeas. These, it's kind of like the petals are just stacked upon each other. And what's great is as these age, you get this almost like transition of from the white, the newest petals, aging into the pink of the older petals. So it gives you this wonderful bicolor look. Just a you know, really cool you know, aspect to the plant, adds a different dimension, a little bit more interest to it. Then there's some oddball ones out there called, this is one called Turkey Heaven, that instead of, you know, like our previous ones where these are more cone shaped, Turkey Heaven is almost like a big leaf or a mophead hydrangea, where it's almost a ball. I think this was found by one of my buddies down in Alabama, where, you know, in his own garden, he's got oak leaf hydrangeas seeding all over the place. So he could find some really cool forms out there. But one of the things, I don't have a photo, one of the nice aspects of oak leaf hydrangea is they can get some fantastic fall color in the garden. So you're talking, you know, oranges going into purples. You know, I've seen them where, you know, they really can take center stage just for their foliage display in late summer going into fall. This is a plant, Hydrangea serrata. It's sometimes called the mountain hydrangea. They're more cold hardy than your Hydrangea macrophylla or your big leaf hydrangeas. But one of the nice things is these just pretty much, you don't have a winter where you're going to lose your flower buds. Even on some of our bad winters where all the big leaf mophead hydrangeas, you know, got all their flowers just, you know, torched because of winter, all the serratas flowered, no problem. They're just bulletproof. One of the things that you'll find with the Hydrangea serratas, the flower heads aren't as big So they're a little bit more diminutive in size. I always feel like they're a little, whereas, something like Endless Summer just can grab you from, 100 feet away. Something like the serratas, like this one, Little Geisha, you really want to go up and inspect, because what's great is they, not only do they have smaller flowers, they can produce them in abundance, so they make up for it. But some of them have just, like this is a more of a double flowered one, a white flowered one, another pink one. And we've got a number of these propagated. And like I said, I will send out a link once we can make sure that we're not giving away like our last plant, but we'll offer those for sale. Preziosa is sometimes thought to be a hybrid between Hydrangea serrata and Hydrangea macrophylla, but it's always been a fantastic plant in the garden. Just the way that the flowers age, it's always pretty much reliably a nice pink in the garden. But when you look at the blooms, you almost have a white center and a pink picotee to the blooms. But this has always been a fantastic plant. I love the red stems on it. Sometimes it's the detail with the Hydrangea serratas that has a little bit more interest to them. This is one called Pretty Maiden. Like I said, while it's not going to be overpowering, this is when you want to have, some of those moments when you want to be a little bit more keyed into detail and taking your time and really inspecting the plant. I think they're more attractive in the garden. Sometimes subtle is better. This is one called Akugaku. This one, again, pollinators love when you can have these lace caps. Pollinators go for them, and I've even noticed on the oak leaf hydrangeas, they have a slight fragrance to them. It's kind of hard to describe, but I remember standing in one of our hydrangea gardens trying to figure out where the fragrance was coming from. Here's another lace cap, Kiyosumi. Kuranai, another nice lace cap, produces them in abundance. So, like I said, it's a little more low key than some of the big ones, like Endless Summer. This is just a stunning one, Shishidanka Nishiki. Nishiki means splash variegation in Japanese, but we kind of found out that this really has lost its variegation. So, but the flowers are, they're like little jewels on the hydrangea. But as you can see, it produces them, I would say in abundance, but it's not going to completely cover the plant, but I love the detail on these. There's something completely different from what's really offered out there. And this is one, like I said, you don't have to worry about a freeze knocking the blooms off your hydrangeas. This one did absolutely fantastic in the garden, was always a good grower. Some of them, tend to be smaller size plants. This one is about the size of its name. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce this one, but this always performed well, flowered well. Really nice lace cap where you can get that blue and white, the little contrast between the fertile and infertile flowers, and good foliage. And some of these actually will get nice fall, kind of a yellowish and purple fall color. Here's Tiara, again, really good growing variety. Nice lace cap. This is one we had at the Ralston Arboretum back when I was just starting out there, and we moved this out of the lath house to the when we started landscaping around the education wing. And this one, it has the really sexy name of Wilson 7820, and all that is when Ernest Wilson was doing his collecting in China, and he was sending China and Japan, and he was sending plants back. Well, this was the plant number 7820, and so that's what this hydrangea goes by. But it's always been it was always a fantastic bloomer in the lath house. It did fantastic in front of the Ralston and the Welcome Center, the Ruby McSwain Center, and just always good pink blooms on this one. This is one that also was with the lath house. I'd propagated, put it at my parents' house, called Woodlanders. This comes from the fantastic nursery down in Aiken, South Carolina, Woodlanders Nursery. They have a great selection of native plants, but also just general great plants for the South. Bob McCartney is sometimes referred to as one of the last cowboys of horticulture. He's a hoot to hang out with, but he made some great plant selections, and this one always does well in the garden. Wonderful lace cap with blue flowers. Just, you know, again, this is one to scoop up when you can find it. And you can get, you know, go blue, it'll get a little bit of pink tones, but again, you can see some of the fall color coming into the leaves. You know, fantastic. What's nice at my parents' house, these actually have been seeding around. So, you know, we've got just a whole bunch of unnamed ones, and, you know, to have a hydrangea as a weed in your garden is, you know, kind of a nice thing. Here's another one, Koko no Yama, which has a little bit of variegation. It's, like I said, very subtle. It's not going to be something that's overpowering. These are for those areas in the garden where you want to slow down and take your time. This one is another variegated one, Owamacha Nishiki. But what's fantastic about this one, it's nice, it's got variegation it does stand out a little bit more than other hydrangeas. You can see another hydrangea right here, kind of a lighter variegation. But what I love is the way that this, as the blooms age, the petals basically invert themselves and they get this reddish tone to them. It's absolutely, you know, talk about a long season flower interest in the garden. And just going back to the beginning, there's that Lannearth White hydrangea right there, again, blooming long into the season. But Owamacha Nishiki, I've even seen where this one, even when it loses its variegation, it's just Owamacha. It's a fantastic hydrangea to have in the garden. And what's great is finally, like the big, you know, nursery, like Proven Winners, Spring Meadow, they are seeing the value of Hydrangea serrata. And they've started marketing. This is one called Tough Stuff that's out there. As you can see, planted in mass, it does fantastic in the garden. Even if it doesn't rebloom, while that's always nice, sometimes it's nice to have a season. It's kind of like, I always feel like with the Encore azaleas, kind of like spring is azalea season. I don't want to necessarily see azaleas again in fall. To everything, there's a time. So, but Tough Stuff is a great plant that's actually out there and available. Even though it's got all the branding and everything, this is one that has lived up to its name, and they've continued some of the breeding work with these. And again, you know, the flower colors can change, of course, with what your soil is. But even though it's not a big mop head, it still is attractive. Now looking at another one of our natives, Hydrangea arborescens. This one has long been known as Annabelle. Everyone has Annabelle hydrangeas. It's a great plant, except for the fact that it tends to flop. You can have it coming into beautiful bloom and we get a thunderstorm and it is sprawled all over the garden. And that's one of the unfortunate things with this plant. And that's been the big drawback. So what we've had is breeders, you know, kind of look at this and go, how can we improve on this? I mean, it's fantastic in bloom. It's a native, so that's nice. So, you know, like Spring Meadow came out with this one called Incredible that, you know, if you put them side by side with a Annabelle that hasn't flopped, you aren't necessarily going to tell the difference. Except for this one was bred to have stronger stems and I think slightly larger blooms. Let's see, best insecticide to use on hydrangeas. You know, the only thing I can think of that really hits hydrangeas would be, you know, some Japanese beetles. I wouldn't worry about insecticides too much on them. This is a weird little, this is something that really plant collectors only grow, or weird people like me that just want something different. And this one, you know, is called Ribbon Lace, and it's got these weirdly serrated leaves. I'd almost more grow this for the foliage character than the flowers. But it's just a little oddball one that I wanted to throw in there. showing you that, yeah, if it's a different plant, I'll grow it no matter what. But the exciting thing came out of the breeding work of Tom Rainey up in Fletcher, North Carolina. Tom I had the opportunity to do an internship with him, and it was, I think I spent the first week with a giant headache because I couldn't process everything he was doing. There was a hydrangea arborescens called Eco Pink Puff that was pink if you squinted your eyes and looked at it sideways. But he started with that. Then Richard Olson, who's now at the National Arboretum, found one while hiking on the Blue Ridge that had a little bit of pink. I think he named it Westerflisk. So Tom started with that just tiny hint of pink and started breeding with it. And he came out with Invincible Spirit. He got that onto the market. Unfortunately, it wasn't that great a plant. So he basically took the criticisms that he got and improved upon it. And what's nice about this plant is it actually I think from every plant sold, $1 goes to breast cancer research. So it's a fantastic plant to have in the garden. It's a nice light pink Annabelle, basically. Let's see, trying to answer this as they come in. Someone asked if it'll hurt Nico Blue plants to prune off dead leaves or blossoms now. On Nico Blue, if you prune off blossoms now, you'll be waiting till next year for blooms again. And I mean, if there's a damaged leaf, you can pull that off, but I wouldn't worry about it until they flower. Tom has continued his breeding. So now he's got Incredible Blush. He's got Invincible Ruby. I think he's got other ones called Wee Willie. So anything that has that NCHA, those are from Tom's breeding program, and they're just fantastic plants. He's taken our native plant and just, up the ante with it. So you've got these wonderful colors that are there. And one of the nice things about arborescens is they tend to reflower. So, he's been looking to get, strong stems, great foliage quality, great flower color, reblooming. So, it's kind of like Tom does some fantastic breeding work. So I would say anything that has that cultivar name with NCH, you can, pretty much darn well guarantee it's going to be a great plant. So I'm going to move beyond flowers. Because hydrangeas can actually be beautiful for foliage. This is the old cultivar Mauritii variegata. This one, it's very hit or miss. You'll actually get decent flowering from it. It's more you grow it for the variegated leaves. And it's always a nice plant, especially in the shade, to add a little bit of color that, like I said, you're mostly going to get that from the leaves. And it's a lace cap, so it's not really that strong a bloomer as it is. This is another old variety, Nigra, that had these black stems to it. But again, not really a great flowering one, would tend to get this anthracnose that hits it. So, that's where we started from. And then you start getting, like I said, when you get flowers, it was always nice. It was a nice little extra, but the only thing you really grew Nigra for were these black stems. But then, out of some Dutch breeders, you got this one called Zorro that had, good flowering, as you can see, really nice flowers coming along, strong stems. It's almost like you took Nigra and gave it steroids. And then Zorro, here's Zorro with flowers, and it did flower very well. So, you had the great, dark stems, but you also had great flowers to it as well. This is one back in the day when I worked for a plant breeders associate or company. This is one we were trying to bring in. There's all sorts of restrictions about bringing hydrangeas into the country. I can't remember exactly the reasoning behind it, but it was kind of like you could bring them into Canada first, and if you brought them into Canada, you could reduce the quarantine. But I think when I left that company, this one was still sitting in Canada. I was hoping it would make it to the US. I have not seen it in the US, so this is kind of a frustrating slide, I'm sure, for anyone, because it just had just amazing foliage character, and it flowered well. If anyone sees this, snap it up. Because it, it was fantastic in terms, it's like a shrub hosta basically. But there's gold leaf varieties. So there's this one called Sun Goddess or Lemon Zest. They're basically the same plant. It's not the heaviest flowering plant. Again, mostly grow it for the leaf quality. But this is where people get an idea and they see that, okay, its limitation is the fact that it doesn't flower well. So they'll kind of check, what can we do to improve this? So, gentleman Richard May down in Florida had one. I don't know if he was just getting seedlings off things and grew this out and named it Pink Lemonade. But again, you might have blue lemonade, depending on the pH of your soil. But this one did fairly well in the garden. Really good gold, foliage to it. But that one I mentioned a while back, Big Daddy. Well, they crossed Big Daddy with one of the gold leaf forms and got Lemon Daddy. And this thing, again, it got all the qualities of both of its parents. So it has really good leaves, big leaves. It's a, like I said, it's reminiscent of a hosta almost, but you can get fantastic flowers from it. This is one, it was being marketed at one point. I haven't seen it out there that much, but if you can find it, this is the benefit of having Google to search plants. But this was always a really nice plant to have in the garden. Big flowers, big leaves, big statement in the shade. This is one that was kind of interesting. This happened, they would tissue culture oak leaf hydrangeas. So peewee hydrangea was a dwarf oak leaf hydrangea that was being tissue cultured in two separate labs, one in the US and one in England. The same mutation happened in both labs where they got a gold foliage version. And it was kind of cool because the breeders decided to just market one and they split the royalties, but that's where we got Little Honey. So it's a gold foliage version of oak leaf hydrangea. It's great in terms of foliage quality. I do feel like the flowers kind of get lost. So, if flowers is what you're going for, then this might not be the best. But in terms of giving you a nice bright spot in the garden, Little Honey is a great plant. Here it is in more sun. And this is a Hydrangea paniculata. We'll talk about it in a second. But these, if they weren't flowering, you wouldn't, it really wouldn't matter because they're giving you color in the garden. But this is that Hydrangea paniculata that we just saw. This is one called Shikoku Flash. Great variegation, but with all that white, the white flowers kind of disappear. So that's the only disadvantage. But if you're looking for color in a shadier part of the garden on a shrub, this is a fantastic plant to have. Like I said, the flowers just disappear against that backdrop. So, trade-offs in the garden. This is a fun one. Not many people grow this. I think I've seen it sold at Lowe's occasionally, but it's Hydrangea aspera. And these what's really cool is the flower buds look like giant eggs on the ends of those stems. But this one I'd grow just for the foliage, just for that bold foliage with this, I wouldn't call that purple. It's a purplish blush. But this just stood out from anything around it in terms of, that bold foliage, that flower, that foliage color. Here it is surrounded by, some Annabelle hydrangeas, but you can see how it jumps out in the garden. But this is one, unfortunately it's patented, so we can't propagate it and sell it. But if you stumble upon it, I think it's a worthy thing. Hydrangea aspera is it's not something that we typically grow here, but it does fine here and it becomes a big plant. It's stunning. This is one, when I was working for that breeders company, I was in Holland and we were supposed to be looking at another hydrangea, and it was driving me crazy seeing this entire block of hydrangea with burgundy foliage and red flowers. And I never could get an answer. I think it was going to a competing company, so they didn't want to talk about it. But so things like this are kicking around out there. So at some point they'll get here. But hopefully that gives you a wide smattering of a lot of different hydrangeas aside from what we're typically growing. Um, like I said, there's always more out there than we're aware of. And look at having diversity in your garden. That'll extend bloom time. Look at some of the different species that maybe aren't as huge a flower, but have a little bit more detail to them. I should have, I think when you got the invite, I sent a separate email out with the plant list. And on that plant list are a couple mail order nurseries where you can search for some of these lesser known plants. Like I said, I will follow up with a link to a Google form for what hydrangeas we've got propagated. We'll make some of those available. But one thing I will caution you with mail order nurseries, and it's a source of frustration for me right now, they are having a banner year, and a bunch of them have actually put a stop to taking orders because they are overwhelmed at this point, which is a good thing. But let's see, so let's see what other questions we've got. Answered about the Nico Blue. Insecticides, I wouldn't worry about them too much. When should they be fertilized with what? You can always hit them at the beginning of the season with something like Osmocote, that's slow release. The best thing to do is really work on your soils so your soils are healthy with microbes and everything. That'll do just as good as our normal fertilizer. Someone asked deer resistant. Lord, I wish. No, deer will definitely eat hydrangeas. But I wouldn't worry, with fertilizer, you could do Miracle Grow. They don't need anything really specific. But you can play around if your soils are 1 pH and you want them another way, you can deal with aluminum. I'm not going to get into that too much because it's just too much work. If it's going to be pink, it's going to be pink. If it's going to be blue, it's going to be blue. But then there are some that are a little bit more true to their name, except for like that Nantucket blue, which was blooming pink. But like I said, hydrangeas, there's so many of them out there. Someone's asking about what are the frost browned ones? Do I trim the brown parts off? Yeah, at this point, you can, some of those leaves that got burned, you could, kind of trim those off. Be mindful though, if you're trimming the ends off of the stems, that's where your flower buds are. So you kind of need to make a call of, am I going to, sacrifice blooms so the leaves look good, or let it grow out a little bit and pull those leaves off? These late frosts, I hope, this is 2 years in a row that we've gotten hit with that. I hope this is not the new normal. But like I said, we'll put some offerings, and it's my intention to constantly start offering some different hydrangeas because it's always nice to have something a little different than what's being pushed to us by the marketers. But with that, if anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to do that. But like I said, if keep an eye on your mailbox. We'll send out a survey because we'd love to get some feedback. I don't know if we'll be back to being in person in the fall, fingers crossed. I do know we will continue, no matter what, whether we're in person or not, we will still do these Zoom portion of the talks so that we can, you don't have to necessarily get over here to see the talk to still be able to participate. So, let us know if there's any topics that are coming up that you'd love to see. But aside from that, we look forward to seeing you in the garden. It's been a good spring. It's still going. We still have tulips in bloom, so this might be the last week for them. So definitely, come over, enjoy the garden, and if you're not a friend, consider becoming one. So thank you, and y'all have a great afternoon. Happy gardening.